Hello everyone and welcome back to another devlog. In this devlog, I'm going to continue working on the tutorial level by adding an enemy and a gun pickup. Let's start with the enemies. Some of you might remember this tutorial level layout that I made. The basic idea is enemies will spawn on some platforms. I'm thinking we can just reuse the player model since that makes the most sense. And of course we give it a different color so that it's not exactly like the player. Lastly, I applied the same animations as the player has, but the only one that's going to be used is the idle animation because the enemy isn't going to move at all. Now let's make the enemy actually work. Now in most video games, enemies have a radius around them in which they can see the player, but for my game that's not really necessary because the enemy will attack the player immediately after it spawns. So I just skipped this step and moved on to the aiming part. Here you can see the enemy aiming at the player. The only issue is the enemy pretty much locks onto the player and essentially has aimbot. So to fix this, I added some delay to the rotation so the enemy would rotate slowly towards the player. Lastly, I added the muzzle flash to the gun of the enemy and gave him the ability to shoot. That's it for the enemy itself for now. I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out, but there's still one last thing I need to do, and that is the spawning of the enemy. For the particles, I'm just gonna reuse the explosion particles the rest of the tutorial components use. I also animated the enemy itself, basically just scales up when it spawns. Now with that complete, it's time to move on to the gun pickup. Essentially, all I'm gonna do is move the gun from the player's hand onto the platform. Firstly, I hid the gun and then rotated the player's arms so that they were facing down. It looks a bit weird because the arms are rotated in such a way that it seems they're holding a gun. I could fix this, but I don't think it's really worth it to create a whole new set of animations just for when the player doesn't have the gun. So for now this works. With the player character out of the way, we can move on to the actual gun pickup. I want the gun to be constantly rotating around like items in a lot of other video games, and with one single line of code I was able to accomplish this. Next I added a pickup trigger that allows the player to pick up the gun. And just as a nice indicator that the gun is in fact an item, I made this sparkle particle and applied it to the gun, and naturally I added the explosion particle. Finally I disabled the UI and made it so when you pick up the gun it shows up, and obviously I used lean tween for this. And now that I have the animations set up, I might as well do the same thing for the pause menu, but unfortunately that's all I have time for today. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next devlog.